The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of delayed flights and impatient travelers. Annabelle Hart, a sharp-dressed white woman in her mid-30s, adjusted her pearl necklace as she tapped her manicured fingers against the boarding pass in her hand. She hated waiting. First class should never mean late, she muttered under her breath. She was used to privilege, used to things bending her way. At the corner of the gate sat a boy maybe 12 years old. He was black, dressed neatly in a pressed shirt and small blazer, clutching a worn-out backpack to his chest. His eyes scanned the room nervously, as though searching for someone who hadn't yet arrived. Annabelle noticed him only because when boarding was called, the boy stood and moved toward the first-class lane. Her eyebrows arched. "What in the world?" she whispered. When the line moved forward, the boy politely offered his pass. The attendant smiled and waved him through. Annabelle stepped up next. "Excuse me," she said sharply, pointing at the black boy who was now walking down the jet bridge. "Are you sure he belongs in first class? Look at him. He's a child." The attendant's polite smile faltered. "Yes, ma'am. His ticket is valid." Annabelle scoffed. "Well, let's hope he knows how to behave." Inside the cabin, Annabelle's irritation only grew. As fate would have it, her seat 1A was already occupied by the black boy. She looked up at him with wide, nervous eyes. I think this is my seat." Annabelle laughed coldly. "Your seat? Oh no, sweetheart, that's my seat. 1A, window, first class." The black boy fumbled with his boarding pass, holding it out timidly. Annabelle snatched it, her eyes widening when she saw the same seat number printed clearly. 1A, her jaw tightened. There must be a mistake. She flagged a flight attendant, her voice dripping with authority. "This child is in the wrong seat. Fix it." The attendant checked both passes, her brow furrowing. "Actually, ma'am, it seems both of you have been assigned 1A. I'll need to sort this out with the gate." Annabelle forced a smile, though her voice carried venom. "Well, until then, perhaps he can move. I paid for comfort." The boy clutched his backpack tighter, his lip trembling slightly. He looked like he wanted to argue but didn't dare. Slowly, hesitantly, he began to stand. "See?" Annabelle said, slipping smoothly into the seat with triumph. Problem solved. Annabelle didn't know that none of the cabin crew had yet realized that the black boy she had just displaced wasn't an ordinary passenger. He was Elijah Carter, the son of the billionaire owner of the airline. And by the end of this flight, Annabelle's entire world was about to turn upside down. The plane soared high above the clouds, engines humming steady. But inside the cabin, an uneasy tension hung like fog. Annabelle reclined luxuriously, sipping her third glass of wine. She was in her element, entitled smug and loud enough that her words carried over the quiet murmur of the first-class cabin. Across the aisle, Elijah sat with his backpack still on his lap. His fingers toyed with the zipper nervously, though his face was calm. He had grown used to people like Annabelle, people who looked at him and saw only skin color, never realizing the weight of the name he carried. But something was different this time. For the first time, Elijah wasn't just enduring prejudice. He was sitting on a secret that could shatter Annabelle's smugness in seconds. Suddenly, the cabin lights flickered. A jolt shook the plane. A ripple of gasps spread as the aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence. Drinks sloshed, trays rattled, and Annabelle's glass of wine spilled across her designer blouse. She shrieked. "Are you kidding me? I paid thousands for this ticket, and now I'm being tossed around like it's a bus ride." Passengers rolled their eyes. The turbulence lasted only seconds, but her tantrum lingered. "Someone better fix this," she snapped at the nearest attendant. "I want to speak to whoever runs this airline. This is unacceptable." Elijah's head turned. His chest tightened. He wanted to speak, but he kept quiet. The turbulence passed, but the ripple effect remained. Annabelle wouldn't stop ranting. The businessman beside Elijah leaned closer, whispering, "If she knew who you were, she'd choke on her words." Elijah gave a small shrug. "My dad always says the truth shows itself when the time is right." Then came the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight issue with the onboard communication system. Nothing serious, but please remain seated as we work to resolve it." Annabelle threw up her hands. "Unbelievable. First turbulence, now technical issues. What kind of airline is this?" Her voice carried. Other passengers grimaced, some clearly annoyed. One man muttered, "It's called flying. Get used to it." But Annabelle wasn't done. If I could speak to the CEO of this company, I'd have his job for this disaster. At that, Elijah lifted his eyes slowly. His gaze met hers, calm but piercing. And for the first time, Annabelle faltered. Moments later, a senior flight attendant arrived at Elijah's row. She bent down respectfully. "Mr. Carter," she whispered discreetly, "your father has been notified of the situation. He'll be waiting when we land. Do you need anything in the meantime?" Annabelle's head snapped around. Carter? Her eyes widened. She remembered seeing that name in glossy magazines. Alexander Carter, the billionaire behind Skylux Airlines. Her laugh from earlier suddenly stuck in her throat, because sitting just 2 rows back from her, quiet as a whisper, was his son, and he had heard everything. Annabelle froze in her seat. The words from the flight attendant still echoed in her ears. "Mr. Carter, your father has been notified." Her mind spun. Mr. Carter. She knew that name too well. Alexander Carter, the billionaire mogul, the man who built Skylux Airlines into a global empire. She had seen his face in Forbes, on billboards, at investor conferences. And now, his son, the quiet black boy she had shoved aside without hesitation, was sitting across from her. Annabelle's throat went dry. Her glass of wine shook slightly in her hand. She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. "Oh, Carter, you said? How interesting. What a coincidence." Elijah didn't even respond. He just looked at her calmly, his expression unreadable, which was worse than any scolding. For the first time on the flight, Annabelle felt small. The seat she had stolen no longer felt like a throne. It felt like a trap. She fumbled for her phone, pretending to scroll. Her thoughts raced. What if he tells his father? What if the crew reports me? What if I'm banned from the airline? Across the aisle, the businessman who had earlier defended Elijah chuckled under his breath. "Looks like karma flies first class, too." A few passengers overheard, smirking knowingly. Annabelle's cheeks burned. When the flight attendant returned, she bent slightly toward Elijah again. "Mr. Carter, the pilot would like me to assure you everything is under control. If there's anything you need, please let me know." Elijah gave a polite nod. "Thank you. I'm fine." Annabelle's jaw clenched. They're treating him like royalty, she realized, panic building. Her mask slipped further when her wine glass tipped from her shaky hand, splashing onto the tray. She gasped, scrambling to clean it, her perfectly manicured facade cracking. Finally, unable to hold it in, Annabelle leaned across the aisle, her voice dripping with forced charm. "So, Mr. Carter, is it? How wonderful to meet you. You must fly often. I had no idea who you were, of course. Just a silly misunderstanding back at the gate." Elijah turned slowly, his eyes calm but sharp, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You didn't need to know my name," he said. "All you needed to know was that I had a right to my seat." Annabelle's lips parted, but no sound came out. The businessman grinned at Elijah's words. A soft murmur of approval drifted from other passengers who'd witnessed the earlier scene. For the first time in her privileged life, Annabelle felt the weight of a room silently judging her. And she hated it. Her heart raced as she thought, this black boy could ruin me with a single phone call. But Elijah didn't move. He simply leaned back, calm and steady, as though the entire world was on his side for the first time ever. Annabelle wasn't in control. Annabelle forced a laugh, the kind of laugh that cracked under its own weight. Her voice was sticky sweet, desperate to smooth over the jagged edges of her earlier cruelty. "Oh, Mr. Carter, I truly didn't mean anything by it back at the gate," she said, leaning toward Elijah with a practiced smile. "You know how chaotic airports can be. Everyone's stressed. Things get a little mixed up. I thought the seat was open. Honest mistake." Elijah didn't even flinch. He kept his gaze steady, his silence louder than any words. The businessman, 2 seats down, whispered just loud enough. "Funny how mistakes always seem to happen to the same people." A couple of passengers nodded in agreement. Annabelle's smile wavered. She tried again, her voice trembling beneath its sugarcoating. "Listen, you seem like a bright young man. I admire that. Sitting here so calm, so collected. You must get that from your father. I've always admired Alexander Carter, such an inspiring figure. Self-made, if I recall, or was it family money? Either way, such an icon." The words spilled out too quickly, clumsy and transparent. It was clear to everyone that Annabelle was scrambling. Elijah finally tilted his head, his tone low but precise. "You admire my father?" "Oh, absolutely." she gushed, eyes wide, grasping for redemption. The Carter name stands for excellence. Truly. Your father built one of the finest airlines in the world. I only fly Skylux because I trust the service, the prestige. Elijah cut her off gently but firmly. Then perhaps you should treat every passenger with the same respect you claim to admire in him. The words hung heavy. Annabelle froze, her face reddening. For once, she couldn't find an answer. She sat back in her seat, lips pressed tight, as whispers rustled through the cabin. It wasn't just Elijah who had put her in her place. It was the truth itself, laid bare for all to see. Minutes later, a flight attendant appeared again, but this time she carried a small, sealed envelope. She leaned discreetly toward Elijah. "From your father, sir," she said softly. Annabelle's eyes darted, straining to read. Elijah opened it calmly. Inside was a handwritten note. "Son, I heard about the incident. I'm proud of the way you've handled yourself. Remember, dignity needs no defense. See you when you land." Dad Elijah smiled faintly, sliding the note back into the envelope. Annabelle's nails dug into her armrest. The contrast was unbearable, her spiraling desperation against his unshakable composure. She thought she had claimed power when she stole his seat, but now she realized she had never even been close. The flight entered its descent. The captain's calm voice filled the cabin, instructing passengers to fasten seatbelts as the city lights shimmered beneath the clouds. But Annabelle wasn't thinking about the landing. Her heart pounded with dread. Every minute felt like a countdown to what she didn't know, but she could feel it tightening around her like a noose. She stole glances at Elijah, who sat quietly, his expression calm, almost serene. His composure made her nerves worse. She expected rage, a lecture, a threat. Instead, his silence condemned her more than words ever could. When the wheels finally touched down, the passengers erupted into scattered applause. Annabelle tried to join in, clapping too loudly, forcing a laugh as if she belonged to the celebration. But then came the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to ask everyone in rows 1 through 5 to remain seated momentarily. A VIP escort will be boarding shortly." Heads turned, murmurs spread. Annabelle's stomach dropped. She knew who that was for. Her eyes darted to Elijah. He calmly closed his backpack, stood when the flight attendants motioned, and gave a polite nod. The cabin door opened. 2 sharply dressed airline executives and a pair of security escorts entered, their presence commanding instant attention. "Mr. Carter," one of the executives said warmly, bowing his head slightly, "your father is waiting just outside. We're here to escort you." Passengers' jaws dropped. Phones subtly lifted, recording the scene. And Annabelle, she went pale. She tried to recover, pasting on her brightest smile. "Mr. Carter, how wonderful. Please allow me to step aside. You deserve nothing less than the best treatment." Her voice dripped with false sweetness, but the cabin had seen the earlier scene. No one was fooled. The businessman across the aisle chuckled. "Didn't you say you'd have the CEO's job for the turbulence?" Laughter rippled. Annabelle's face burned with crimson. Elijah paused briefly before exiting, turning back just enough to meet her eyes. "Seats and titles don't make people better," he said softly, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "How you treat others does." The cabin went silent. His words struck like lightning. And then, without another glance, Elijah walked out with his escort, leaving Annabelle crumbling under the weight of her own shame. Outside, she could see through the window Alexander Carter himself, waiting on the tarmac, greeting his son with pride and affection. Cameras flashed. Passengers whispered, eyes still darting toward Annabelle, their expressions a mixture of judgment and satisfaction. For once in her life, Annabelle had no words, and for the first time she understood what it meant to be truly small. The cabin emptied slowly, passengers buzzing with whispers. Some sneaked glances at Annabelle, others smirked outright. The memory of her arrogance earlier in the flight was still fresh, but now it stood in stark contrast to Elijah's quiet dignity. Annabelle lingered in her seat, stalling, praying the crowd would thin before she had to face what awaited outside. But fate had other plans. As she stepped off the jet bridge, the sight before her stopped her cold. There he was, Alexander Carter, the billionaire, the man she had once boasted about admiring, the man who built the empire she so arrogantly criticized midair. He stood tall in a tailored suit, but what struck her most was the warmth in his eyes as he embraced his son. Cameras flashed, reporters craned necks, executives hovered close. This was a moment of legacy, of power but also of love. Annabelle's knees weakened. She knew she couldn't slip away unnoticed. Alexander Carter finally looked up, his sharp gaze scanning the stream of disembarking passengers. His eyes landed briefly on her. She froze, heart in her throat. Annabelle opened her mouth, ready to babble excuses, to paint herself as misunderstood. But before she could, Elijah spoke softly to his father. "She's the one who took my seat." The words weren't bitter, they were simply the truth. A hush fell. Executives glanced at one another. Even the nearby reporters leaned in. Annabelle's face crumpled. "Mr. Carter, please, I didn't mean." Alexander raised a hand, silencing her. His voice was calm, controlled, but carried the weight of a man who had built an empire on discipline and respect. Seats can be taken back. Dignity, however, is not so easily restored. The words hit like a hammer. He turned back to his son, resting a proud hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You handled yourself with grace. That matters more to me than any title, any seat, any wealth." The crowd murmured in admiration. Phones captured every second. Annabelle stood there, red-faced, trembling under the weight of a truth she could not escape. For the first time in her life, no money, no name, no excuses could protect her. The humiliation was complete and deserved. Elijah gave her one last look. He was not angry nor vengeful, was just steady. "Respect isn't reserved for power," he said quietly. "It's owed to everyone." And with that, he walked beside his father into the camera's flash, leaving Annabelle behind smaller than she had ever felt before. And so, in the end, a seat wasn't just a seat. It was a test of character, humility, and respect. But one woman failed, and a young black boy rose above. Because true power doesn't come from wealth or titles or taking what isn't yours. True power comes from dignity and the courage to carry it quietly. If this story of justice and humility touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to Colorless Voices, where every story carries a lesson worth remembering.